Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Writhing by Abe Moss, narrated by Hilary Huber. Prologue. Come home, Alex. Standing barefoot on the side of the dark road, she rubbed stinging sweat from her eyes. The car's headlights were bright, harsh, like two sun-glared coins. She stood shielding her face from the light and their gazes, listening to the idling engine, the breeze through the woods at her back, the leaves rustling like paper wings. "Where are you going, anyway?" one of the men asked. There were two, one in the passenger seat and the other standing just outside the driver's, speaking over the open door. "What did you run all this way for? You worried us." Alex remained silent. There were too many questions of her own to choose from, and she didn't even know if she had the answers to his. After nearly a minute of waiting, the man said, "Why don't you just come home? Your mom's worried sick." "She's not my mom," Alex said, and dropped her hand and stared into the blinding light. "And this isn't my home." The man bent his head, peered in at his partner in the passenger seat, and they both shook their heads as if to share their confusion. "What's this about?" he asked. "Why'd you run?" It had all been so disorienting, she wasn't sure anymore. It was an impulse, she supposed, an instinct. Was fear a good enough excuse? "Who is that boy?" she finally asked. "I saw you dragging him out of that car. He was screaming like... Standing like a black cardboard cutout in the dark, the man said, "He's a troubled kid we're trying to help is all. Is that why you ran?" "But who is he?" The man shifted his weight from one leg to the other and peered around at the woods, down the lonely road. "He's nobody important to you, just a kid who needs help." "Is he like me then? Like I was?" Alex could make out the tiniest movement of the man's shadow in the dark as he shrugged and nodded. "You could say that, yeah." They stood a while longer, a standoff of sorts. Alex couldn't decide what it was she wanted from them, but going back gave her an uneasy feeling, a cold, twisting inner gut, like nothing good would ever come of it. "You can ask Helen all the questions you want when we get back. I know she'd be glad to know you're safe and not out here alone." Helen doesn't give a shit about me, Alex thought. She was now beginning to understand after 6 years. She still didn't really know the woman, not deeply or personally. She often seemed one way to her and then entirely different in an instant. Tonight, Alex witnessed a side of her she never expected. Vicious, ruthless. To put it plainly, Helen was unpredictable. "Will you let us take you home?" She could always keep running, she thought. But again, she didn't know what she was running from, or, better yet, where she was running to. The road on which they stood, lit under a midnight moon, only ran two ways, like most roads, and only one direction's destination was certain. She sighed, defeated, and went to the car. The man opened the back door for her and she got in, that terrible doubt alive and writhing inside her. It was done, she thought. She'd chosen this fate. It was a longer fuse in place of a shorter one, which would ultimately achieve the same result in the end. She would go back to them, to Helen, to Amberton. She smiled at the thought, as if she had anywhere else to be. The Woman and Her Ghost, Part 1. 1. Loneliness. Lucy froze. Her husband was making his way down the hallway. She raised a hand to him. He came to a stop, and his eyes flickered between her and the front door. "What is it?" he whispered. She straightened her arm out again, emphasizing the flat of her palm. Wait. Another knock on the door. Aaron didn't seem to understand why she wasn't answering it, but he obeyed anyhow. After another moment, he whispered, "Why aren't you answering the door?" She mouthed one word, enunciating it silently with perfect clarity. Brenda. Erin shrugged and continued toward the kitchen. "Hey," she whispered after him. He turned, and she jabbed a finger toward the floor, her eyes bulging. "Feet." He stopped, hands raised by his head, and mouthed, "Okay." After it was safe to assume she'd left, Lucy tiptoed to the door and peered through the tiny peephole, spotting the back of a green hand-woven sweater in the dark, making its way down the front porch and over the lawn. Lucy turned, back against the door, and sighed, her shoulders sinking dramatically with relief. "That was mean," Erin told her, grinning smugly as he entered the kitchen and made his way to the refrigerator. "Oh, don't even. You'd be doing the same if you were me. She's crazy." "She isn't crazy." "But she is. You know what she does." "The stuff she does isn't crazy," he said. "It's more desperate." She followed him into the kitchen, staring skeptically at the back of his head. "Desperate? Maybe. She thinks we're best friends. A delusion. Delusions are crazy." He poked his head in the fridge. "What do you mean she thinks you're best friends? Maybe you're the only, or the closest thing to a friend she's got." She paused, unable to refute the possibility. That she might be an asshole occurred to her too, but that didn't matter. Why can't she find literally anyone else? "I'm no psychologist," Erin said, pulling his head out with half a turkey breast in his hand. He took a bite. "But I would think someone in her position would have a hard time meeting anyone new. Her husband died, for crying out loud, you know. And she's known you for a bit. You see each other every day, in passing." He stood by the sink and took another bite of his sandwich, and Lucy stood quietly behind him, arms folded. She wanted to say something, anything, to make herself feel better, like she wasn't a horrible person for ignoring the poor, lonely, bereaved woman. But nothing came to mind, so she continued standing there, angry at her husband for putting such contradictory ideas into her head. "You're right," she told him. "You're not a psychologist." He laughed. "I bet I'd make a great best friend." "Have at it. Look at what happened to the last guy." "There you go being mean again." "What do you want from me? He died almost 2 years ago. We barely knew her when it happened, and I still felt bad when she told me. I mean, you haven't been in there. Her upstairs, it's all sorts of sad. I know people mourn and junk, but she was... I don't even know what to call it, but she had a fucking shrine for the guy. I mean, not exactly a shrine, but she had an entire bedroom just full of all his junk. After 2 years? That's what some people do when they mourn. Why would she just up and get rid of everything? 2 years isn't that long. That's not the point." She hunched her shoulders, arms hugged around her middle. "I felt bad for her and thought I'd give her some company once or twice. I didn't expect it to be a regular thing. And I even had a good time at first until she started watching for me to come home or even leave. I've told you all this before." "Yes, you did tell me. She would wait for me to pull out of the garage. 'Oh, you going to the store? Mind if I come along?' She ran behind my car. I couldn't take it after a while." "You're a saint to have put up with a crazy bereaved woman for so long. What was it, like a month?" Lucy shot a nasty glare his way, only to be disappointed to see he was making his way down the hallway to the bedroom. Why did he always have to pretend to be the good guy, she wondered. It was cool out. Crickets chattered to her right, down in the bushes on the side of the porch. She knocked again, knowing full well she had seen their car pull in only seconds ago. She didn't know for sure whether it was Lucy or her husband. She waited a moment longer before she heard the faint tapping of shoes on the floor inside. Someone was indeed there. They were hiding. She turned back, faced the inky black sky. Full of defeat, she stepped down from the porch and made her way over the sprinkler-dewed lawn, flip-flops flapping. "Why do I do this to myself?" she thought. Lucy Frampton wasn't a nice person, so why did she want her company so badly? The more she thought about it, the more she thought she didn't even like her. She was possibly even starting to hate her. Hiding from her like that, like an uppity snob, Brenda thought as she crossed the street. She almost thought it would feel good to slap her around a little, show her she's not the queen she thinks she is. As she approached her own home just across the street, the sounds of the crickets died, and even the sound of stirring evening air dissipated. She came to the door, reached for the knob. She imagined a hand on the other side, feeling the knob with dirt-coated fingers, the skin peeled back from the fingernails, the flesh eaten away to reveal thick, sinewy strands flexing back and forth. But that was impossible. The dead stayed dead. Only crazy people believed otherwise, and Brenda was definitely not crazy. Lonely, yes, but crazy? No. She opened the door. It cried shrilly. She stepped inside. She was alone. No animated corpses here. She walked down the narrow entrance hall, checking each dark doorway as she passed, and then continued up the stairs to the upstairs hallway. Her bedroom waited at the hallway's end, opposite the guest bedroom, whose door stood ajar, a dim blue light flashing from its gap. Of course, she thought. She stepped into her quiet bedroom, turned around, checked the hallway once more, shut the door behind her, and fastened the lock. She sighed. From out in the hall came the creak of an opening door. She waited. She didn't know if she actually heard footsteps or just imagined them, anticipating them. It was so quiet, even the silence seemed to hum, a silence that could drive a person mad. A knock on the door. The knob rattled. "No, this is my private time," Brenda said. She rolled her eyes as if she'd known it all along and turned to her closet. She flung the door open, the fists still tapping in the hall. She pulled a large, silky lavender nightgown from its hanger, held it up. It fit right, but she couldn't help but look at it disappointedly. She was a larger woman, stout. Sometimes she wished to change that, but then she always thought, for whom? She folded the gown over her arm and walked into the adjoined bathroom. She got the shower going, and while she waited for the water to warm, she looked in the mirror. What's happened to my face? She wondered. She was only in her mid-40s, but she looked so much older. Her mouth was sad, the corners drooped and tired. Stress and tragedy had aged her, she thought. She undressed and stepped into the shower. Chills covered her shoulders and the backs of her legs at the water's touch. For a moment, she smiled. She felt her face, ran her hands through her thinning brown hair. Lucy, she muttered. She both envied and despised her. Not only did she have a perfect life, a perfect husband, a perfect, beautiful body, but she had to be a skunk, too. And Brenda hated skunks. Too good for Brenda. Try to be a nice neighbor, a good friend, and what does it get you? Nothing. Shunned. Because they were happily married, that made them better than her? They probably laughed while she waited on the porch. Now they were probably making love, enjoying each other's bodies, possibly creating their own equally mean-spirited spawn. Why should such nasty people have the best in life? Although she was standing under a hot torrent of water, she felt a cold pressure against her back. She turned quickly, almost slipped, but braced herself against the shower wall, and saw that nobody was there. She ripped the shower curtain open, expecting to see the face of a dead man staring back. There was no one, of course. She threw a towel around herself, stomped into her bedroom, and saw that her door was closed and locked just as she'd left it. Her bedroom window was cracked. Maybe it had been a breeze. She finished up in the bathroom, slipped into her nightgown, and returned to her bedroom door. She didn't want to do it, but she didn't want the television on all night either. It would upset him, but she could live with that. She grinned. She could live with that. She unlocked her door and stepped into the hall. The guest bedroom, previously ajar, was now fully open. The television was still on. She approached the door and stopped. This was where she kept all his things, everything that stirred memories of him, stored in boxes, on shelves, in desk drawers, and stuffed into suitcases. Like the pillow he'd once tried to smother her with. She didn't like to remember these things. She often asked herself why she didn't just throw the items away, trash them, and forget them. She didn't know. The golf set was the worst. He'd adored it more than anything. More than her, which wasn't saying much. When he wasn't ridiculing her or accusing her of something outlandish, he was golfing. By himself, of course. Much like Brenda now, he didn't have friends. But the clubs she remembered most. It was the closest he'd ever come to killing her. One afternoon, Brenda was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the mountains in the distance. A great storm was moving in. The thunder and the wind pleased her, watching the trees shimmy and bob. She was washing the dishes, but her mind was elsewhere. She stood, frozen, at the window, plate in hand, smelling the citrus of the dish soap, gazing dreamily into the afternoon gloom. Only her eyes moved, darting from one flash to the next. "The hell you staring at?" Startled, she dropped the soap-slicked plate into the sink where it broke. Dazed, she looked down at the blue shards of glass. She turned around and said, "You startled me. Back from the river already?" "Yeah," he said, eyeing the sink. "Too stormy." She hesitated and followed his gaze to the broken plate. She cleared her throat. "That's a shame. You love the river." He smiled. He was aware of her attempt to distract him from the mess she'd made. "Yeah, I do." She could see each and every tooth into the back of his grinning mouth now. She returned a trembling smile. He bent his head to get a better look at the broken dishware, and Brenda shifted her weight to place herself further in his view. "You break another plate?" He nudged her aside to look for himself. He bit his lip, and Brenda caught sight of his white-knuckled fists. He turned to her, his face reddening. Only it wasn't anger that made his cheeks hot. He was giving himself a reason. "Let's check what plates we have left." Brenda didn't hear him. She was too entranced by the bulging vein in his forehead. He opened the cupboard. "Ah, we have one matching plate left." Brenda followed him with her eyes across the kitchen, where he set the plate on the counter. His eyes wrinkled into slits, from the plate to her face, then back to the plate. His eyes targeted the two. "It's only a plate," Brenda said. "You know I hate setting the table with mismatched dishware." Brenda didn't move. Her arms were glued at her sides, and she suddenly became aware of how terrified she must appear. "You stay there." He turned and left the kitchen. Brenda shuddered. She knew it was far from over, but if she could keep silent and let him have his tantrum, maybe he'd get bored and leave her alone. Even now, standing before the guest bedroom and the flickering television, she could remember the silver eye of light that traveled up the length of the club as he entered the kitchen. He carried it rested over his shoulder. "What are you doing with that?" "Watch," he told her. He took the plate from the counter and set it on the hard linoleum. He lowered the head of the club to the plate, tapped it twice. He lifted his eyes to Brenda, making sure she did as she was told. To watch. He must have been pleased to see her face so fear-stricken, because that satisfied grin crept across his mouth once again. With a grunt, he hit the plate. There was a sharp crack and little tinkling sounds of debris scattering over the kitchen floor around his feet. She retreated into the corner by the sink, raised her hand to her heart as if to grab it and slow its beating. The look Brenda saw on his face was one she'd seen before. His adrenaline was racing, and she knew it was only a matter of seconds before he remembered her, cowering in the corner like a fly in a spider's web. He gazed at her, the vein in his head on the verge of rupturing. Her eyes never leaving his, she skirted the counter toward the laundry room door. The worst part of it, she thought, was that there wasn't an influence. He wasn't an alcoholic or anything else. He was just Willard. He lunged forward, breaking a piece of plate glass under his foot. He stumbled. Shit! Brenda turned her back to him, hurried through the laundry room door. When she turned to throw it shut, he was already upon her, wearing an expression that said it was all her fault. A fidgeting pulled her back into the present. Her fingers rolled into fists, her legs locked, hypnotized by the snowy static on the television. She pulled a strand of wet hair behind her ear. It was only a memory. She entered without turning on the light, fearful of what she might see, fearful of the light that might reflect on any long, slender steel objects stowed with the rest of the boxes. She made her way to the television, catching the movement again in the corner of her eye. Without looking, she knew it was him. The figure had its back to her, facing an old bookcase, rolling their finger from one book to the next as if searching for a certain one. She leaned down, wiped the shower water from her forehead that hadn't dried. Or was it perspiration? In the darkness, the flashing screen didn't aid in finding the off button on the face of the television, so instead she reached behind and pulled its cord from the wall. Even in complete darkness, the black figure was still visible, its black somehow blacker than the rest, and when Brenda switched off the television, its head rose from its searching and turned towards her. On her way to the door, she couldn't help looking over her shoulder. The figure swiveled on its heel and faced her, just a motionless mannequin in the dark. It made no attempt to follow, only watched. Good night, Brenda thought, as she stepped into the hall and closed the door behind her. It wouldn't stay closed for long. In fact, after returning to her room, settling into bed and switching off her lamp, wrapped in blankets and pillows, she heard the sound of the guest bedroom's door pushing open and the sound of phantom footsteps trailing down the hall. 2. Willard. Dressed in old, baggy, ragged clothes, Lucy worked up a sweat under the morning sun, weeding a long-dead vegetable patch. She was well aware nothing would come of her efforts, wasn't even particularly interested in gardening or keeping up with yard work, but she was bored. Such was the case a lot these days, being unemployed. She used to have a job, an assistant manager at a small clothing outlet. Hated it. She'd been fired for one too many altercations with customers. Once or twice you could get away with it. Finding stupid people in retail was like finding weeds in the dirt. Managers understood that, but only once or twice. Frequent tardiness didn't help either. Nearly 2 months later, and she still wasn't searching. Aaron didn't pressure her. His job was enough. But having something extra was nice, and she had to admit putting up with customers was better than sitting at home all day, with no one to talk to. The vegetable patch proved more strenuous than she anticipated. However, she didn't like the idea of starting something and accomplishing nothing, so she decided to do the front yard instead and weed the small area next to the porch around their single bush. That way she could show Aaron she did something while he was gone, that she didn't spend the majority of her day sitting at her computer watching funny cat gifs and reading up on the latest Hollywood gossip. Would she still do exactly that? Of course. But Aaron didn't need to hear about it. He'd hear about her productive outdoor project instead. She entered the front yard through the gate at the side of the house. The neighborhood was quiet, nearly everyone at work by now, their homes empty. Brenda's house was directly across from their own. Instinctively, Lucy turned away, afraid Brenda might be watching from a window. She did that quite often. That's how she knew when Lucy got the mail or went for a run. Brenda was a lonely woman, Lucy knew. She really felt sorry for her, truly. But she couldn't give Brenda what she needed, and she didn't feel obligated to try. Friendship was a burden she didn't need in her life right now. So she quickly ducked next to her bush, acting busy, when there came a loud, shrill creaking, the sound of Brenda's door. Everyone on Sundown Ave knew the sound. Maybe this was the year she'd buy her a can of WD-40 for Christmas. So it opened, and opened. Lucy waited. It continued to cry. Becoming curious, she turned and looked. The door was creeping open, inch by inch. That, or someone in hiding pulled the door, watching in secret. After all, it was nearly wide open without a body in its frame. Though the air was still and hot, it appeared as though it must have been a breeze or something like it. Finally, it met the wall and stopped. "Be a good neighbor," a distant voice told her, probably Aaron's voice. She stood, scratched at the back of her neck. Maybe it was a trap, a ploy to get her attention, a ploy to get her in proximity. No. She turned to her bush. Maybe she deserved to be caught, she thought. After how cruel she'd been the night before, maybe she owed Brenda a visit, or at the very least, to close her door like a decent human being. She stood and crossed the lawn once more, came to the curb, looked from left to right, and then faced Brenda's home. Son of a bitch, I knew it. Through the front door at the end of the hall stood Brenda. She appeared to be wearing gym clothes and a headband. Her shadowy figure wobbled drunkenly. Lucy stood, defeated and ultimately sorry she ever decided to be considerate. At first, she was sure Brenda saw her standing across the street. She would wave and come outside, comment on how strange it was that her door should open on its own, all according to plan. But instead, Brenda came to a halt halfway down the darkened hall and stopped, leaning tiredly against the wall. Lucy's fingers twitched at her side. Was something wrong? After a moment, Brenda began to slowly shake her head from side to side. Perhaps she was drunk. Lucy, feeling torn, raised her hand to wave at Brenda, to wake her from the strange trance in which she seemed to be caught. Just as she did, however, the door began to close. Lucy heard the familiar whine of its hinges, shutting faster than it opened, and 3 seconds later, Brenda and the shrouded hallway were replaced by the gleaming white surface of the front door. "Brenda?" she whispered. Brenda didn't sleep well. After listening for an hour to the footless footsteps, she tossed and turned for another hour before finally falling asleep. And even then, her dreams robbed her of true rest. She dreamed of blood, a lot of it, pouring in a smooth, endless sheet. She saw what may have been a face within, staring through expressionlessly, watching. Its eyes were flashing lights, blinding and hectic, blinking, spinning, pulsating through the thick cherry downpour, blue and red. At one point the face opened its mouth, a dark hole, and it screamed at her. A whining sound, high and then low, high and then low, wordless, becoming louder and louder. Brenda woke with a startled cry. She sat upright and felt her forehead, cool with sweat. She threw the damp blankets off her legs. Bright light was coming through her curtains, and upon looking at the clock on her nightstand, she saw it was 11 in the morning. She'd slept in. She remembered waking up several times, looking at the clock and listening for a disturbance that may have wakened her. But there was only silence. She was simply restless. That was all. But it was daytime now, which was fine. During the day, the house was quiet, free from phantom footsteps and cold breezes. She had a whole day to herself, just to think and relax, maybe try over at Lucy's again to see if... God damn it, she thought. She couldn't do that. She was done with Lucy. She gritted her teeth just thinking about the night before. She thought if she even saw Lucy again, she might have...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?